Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance in the Crawlspace studios in Wormtown. Lance is doing the worm. What's up?
Just to let you know, I'm not doing the worm for fun. I'm doing it out of respect in the spirit of the worm because we have rain coming up in the next few days and it's going to wash away all of that nasty frozen snow out there.
It's the worm dance, folks. And today on Crawlspace, we are playing the clip from our Facebook and Twitter live show that we did on Martin Luther King Day on this past Monday, just a couple days ago, if you're listening to this on Drop Day, Lance. And in this episode, we have Chloe Cantor, our good friend, who is sort of our in-house psych expert, if you will. She's got a psych degree, and she's big time into this.
We covered a lot of interesting topics. We did the Jayme Kloss recovery, her abduction and recovery, and we touched on Brandon Lawson's disappearance, took some questions. It was fun. One thing that I want to mention off the bat, this morning, had this happened yesterday, we would have talked about this, but this morning we received a lot of people notifying us about this missing person in Boston. Her name is Olivia Ambrose. She's 23 years old, 5'2", about 145, blue eyes, short, curly brown hair. She was last seen at the Hennessy's Bar at just after 11 p.m. in the Faneuil Hall district of Boston on January 19th. And she left with an unidentified man. So if anybody has any information on this, look her up, Olivia, Olivia, Ambrose, or Ambrosi, Ambrose, or contact the Boston Police, 617-343-4500.
So before we throw this audio, just understand that this was taken from our Facebook live show, so it will sound a little bit different. It has a slightly different vibe than your typical Crawlspace episode, and if you've been a long-time listener of this show, by the way, our 2-year podversary is right around the corner, Lance, February 1st.
February 1st.
Yeah, but if you're a longtime listener of the show, you will understand and probably recognize the different vibe there. We also talk a little bit about Suitcase Jane Doe, our last episode that we did on Crawlspace, and we really wanted to get Chloe's take on it because Chloe and Jennifer Amell, the filmmaker that we're working with in this Suitcase Jane Doe case, and they spoke a little bit offline, and we wanted to hear what Chloe had to say about it. Okay, so we get into that as well, and just wanted to remind you to check out Stitcher Premium because, as I just said, our 2-year podversary is rapidly approaching, Lance, but not all of the catalog of Crawlspace is on the Apple Podcasts or your favorite provider's feed.
Well, where can I find this then?
Stitcher Premium, and that's the only place right now, Lance. So check out StitcherPremium.com and subscribe. It's $4.99 a month. You will get a free month with code MMM. Stitcher Premium is a great product. They have countless comedy albums on there, which is a lot of fun, and True Crime Garage does a show on there. We also do our creator's commentary for Missing Maura Murray on Stitcher Premium, so if you are a big Missing Maura Murray fan, you will really enjoy those. And we have another show, Lance.
What's the other show?
Empty Frames.
Empty Frames. That's our art show. We talk about the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist in Season 1, and Season 2 is what I've been saying is a bridge season. We talk about other art heists. We talk about really significant moments in art history. We talk more with Turbo Paul Hendry. He comes on the show twice. He is the liaison between the criminal world and getting artwork back, a recovery process for many, many stolen artifacts, and he's such a trip to talk to and listen to.
So Empty Frames is now encompasses all of art crime, and it is a lot of fun. So definitely check that out once you subscribe to Stitcher Premium. Okay, so thanks for listening, everybody, and enjoy this live vault episode. Hey everybody, welcome to Crawlspace Live Vault today here on January 21st, 2019. We are live on Facebook and on Twitter, and I am Tim Polieri here in the Crawlspace studios in Wormtown here with Lance Reenstierna and Chloe Cantor.
What's going on?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
Nothing at all.
Just doing a live show.
Good riffing until we were all settled into our seats.
Chloe, how are you today?
I am doing great. So happy to be back in the studio to be talking about a number of topics today. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, we got a lot of topics today. We are going to talk about Suitcase Jane Doe a little bit, which was our last episode of Crawlspace. And we want to get Chloe's take on that. And we're working with an interesting person named Jen Amell, who is a filmmaker out of Pennsylvania. And she has been diving into the case of Suitcase Jane Doe. And we'll get into that in a few minutes. We also want to talk about the Brandon Lawson disappearance a little bit. And we did an episode about Brandon Lawson's disappearance a couple of months ago now. And there is some follow-up that we wanted to do. And we wanted to read some comments from the YouTube video to hear what people think of that. Let's see. And then we're going to talk about Jayme Kloss a little bit and her disappearance and the murder of her parents and how she resurfaced and really the whole case of Jake Patterson, that son of a bitch who was arrested for kidnapping and murder. And just want to say hi to our communities out there. How's it going, Mary? In the Facebook chat room, Haley is there, and Jason Watts, and Astrid as well. How's it going? Please feel free to chime in with some comments. We will read them. Twitter may be a little more difficult to stay.
We're still trying to figure out the Twitter part of this whole thing.
We're still troubleshooting the Twitter aspect of the live vault, but we'll get there eventually. At least we have an angle.
What's up, Twitter? Yep.
What's up, Twitter? You're up there. Wormtown is sub-zero temperatures today.
It's cold.
It's really cold out there. And I think Lance had a message for
I just
drivers.
want a really quick message. On the way in today, listen, people, if you have a truck, if you have a pickup truck, if you have anything bigger than a car, even if you have a car and you're driving, it is your responsibility to please clean off your car. I don't feel like I should be dodging frozen sheets of ice coming at my car, as well as other cars trying to do the same bit of dodging. If you have a semi, for God's sake, clean the top of your semi off. They're coming off at like 20 by 20 foot squares, smashing to the ground.
It's dangerous, especially when the weather is as cold as it is, because this is just straight up ice. It's not like it's snow and it's going to just
this is
break
frozen
apart.
Snow. This is smash into you. At the very least, it's super dangerous for you to be dodging this.
Yeah, this is tap dance on a lake kind of weather out there in Wormtown today.
I could have been a little fired up when I came in today because I cleaned off my car after it'd been plowed in. It's that awful ice snow that you got to like chisel through. My car was barely recognizable. It looked like a snowbank, and I have like 1.5 arms, and it's winds blowing, and it's like negative 17 degrees with the wind chill factor, and then you get out on the highway and it's like, do I need to do this now? Do I need to dodge this goddamn sheet of ice? All right, I'm done.
No one else.
Clean off your cars, guys.
Yeah.
When you put in all that work and no one else does, it's a little frustrating. I understand.
I don't need you placating to me.
Sorry. Don't storm off. Sorry.
So let's see. Let's talk about Chloe's blog real quick. And Chloe, what is going on with your blog, and what is the URL to that blog?
If anyone wants to check it out, it's Chloe, which is spelled CHLOE, from crawlspace.blogspot.com. I am mainly covering the disappearance of Breonna Maitland, which is what I have been primarily covering when I appear on this show. I figured some people prefer, well, if you're listening to podcasts, you don't necessarily prefer reading to listening, but some people like that supplement. There are things that I have worked on in interviews that I've done that haven't been on the show that you can read, so you can glean some new information. My latest post was a Q&A, which I sort of opened up to the online community with Breonna's dad, Bruce Maitland, sort of going directly to the source. You know, he's the family spokesperson. He's the one that's working directly with the Vermont State Police, so he was really able to answer some common questions that people have. I am updating it every week or every other week as much as I can, and the goal of it is to really just keep people engaged and informed in a case that is so rooted in rumor and conjecture.
And Chloe's new podcast is coming soon. Hopefully we can get it up and running by the end of January, but there's a little more work that needs to happen. But it's going to be great. It's called True Crime Twins, and the first episode is almost done. Second episode you recorded, Chloe.
Yes, I don't know if I should go into which cases
Sure,
we're doing.
tell us a little bit about it, yeah.
So episode 1, we will be covering the unsolved murder of 19-year-old college student Faith Hedgepeth. You might have come across the case if you watch a lot of forensic shows. It happened in 2012, and despite DNA evidence left behind, a handwritten note, and potentially even a voice recording, the case remains unsolved. The DNA that was left behind has been submitted for comparison to over 800 people with no match, and it was actually just submitted to GEDmatch in hopes of finding something new out of there. It's a fascinating case. Case 2 will be the disappearance of Alyssa Turney, with Sarah Turney as our guest. Alyssa was 17 when she went missing in Phoenix, Arizona, and that case remains unsolved. Sarah has been this completely inspiring advocate. I'm sure you've come across her, and if you haven't, her handle is usually Justice for Alyssa. Case number 3, we haven't recorded yet, but I'm very excited about it. I've had a relationship with a woman named Jenny Carrieri. She is the twin sister of murder victim Jenny LeCornu, and that's another unsolved case, and that one really has not received any attention, even though it really deserves it. There was a witness, there is a description of a suspect and his vehicle, and it's still unsolved. So there's just a lot to unpack. We're really excited about it, and I think that we can come at it from a perspective that you're not really used to. So I think that's what we're bringing to the table.
And in the third case, you talked about the guest that you're going to have on. Her sister was her twin sister, right?
Yes.
Is that okay? And that's just like you and Melina, your co-host.
Yes. So I'm excited for everyone to hear Melina's voice as well. Astrid just left a really nice comment talking about my background in the field of mental health, and she actually has that too. She currently works at a psych hospital, so that is just a very relevant element in almost all of these cases, coming from the victim to the perpetrator. So we can really bring a lot to the table in that sense. And with Jody LeCornu's case, I feel like that's why I connected with Jenny so early on. She actually reached out to us in the early production phases of Crawlspace, and her story is just heart-wrenching. And you'll see how much she has done and how much she has fought to try to get justice for her beloved twin. And the more attention it can get, the better.
Okay, so let's talk about Suitcase Jane Doe. And if you're unfamiliar with this case, we did our last episode. The very last episode of Crawlspace was called Suitcase Jane Doe, and it was on this unfortunate murder victim who is not identified.
This is a case that started in 1995 in July. Just a quick recap. It takes place in Downingtown in Westchester, Pennsylvania, an area called Valley Creek. The twin tunnels, which are actually 3 tunnels, so these stone tunnels that go underneath a overpass for a railroad. A local fisherman was culling the area, and he found a suitcase. And inside the suitcase, wrapped up in a blanket, in a garment bag, and it was duct taped and wired shut, was the torso of a woman who is said to be either of Hispanic or Eastern European descent.
And her head was also found on that torso. Is that accurate?
Her head and probably her hands, but that's only brought together because they had fingerprints taken from the torso. So we can assume that one hand was there. About 6 months later, in January, her legs were found at a walking/running park about
I think it's 50 or 60
miles down from the first location. And
Yeah.
a jogger found that in January, also in Pennsylvania. So we have Jennifer Amell, who's a journalist, a writer, a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, an actress. She reached out to us. She has a website called suitcasejanedoe.com, and she just joined Twitter. So that's very exciting.
That's right.
So her Twitter handle is at Amell, AMELL_Jen, JENN. So follow her and you'll get updates on Suitcase Jane Doe, and we will be having more interviews and episodes with her. She's going to act as our boots on the ground location person in Pennsylvania. She's talked to a lot of people, including law enforcement, journalists who cover the case at the time, and people who are close to the scene, like the guy the fisherman, his
Right.
friend, one of his best friends. So this is one of those sort of mysteries that we tend to get involved in, which is it's not very straightforward. You look at somebody who's involved in it, and it peels back to another layer of mystery.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that. It's a pretty fascinating case.
And to Astrid's point here about Chloe's expertise in psychology, I am desperate to hear Chloe's take on this case.
There isn't much that we know. I think that Jen has done such an amazing job at putting together what is known. So I definitely recommend everyone go on her website that we just linked or verbally linked to, because that's where you're going to get all the definitive information. One of the things that we do know is that the fisherman who discovered her body seemed to be quite motivated. In the suitcase that she was found in was wrapped in a garbage bag and in wires and in tape, and he really picked it apart and took everything apart to get to it. And something that Jen and I had discussed when we spoke on the phone a few days ago is at a certain point after a few weeks, there must have been an overwhelming smell of human decomposition. So if you're thinking, oh, maybe he's looking for money, he had to have smelled something really vile, and you have to consider the level of motivation there. And that's something that I don't think really sits quite well with any of us. And I don't want to point fingers, especially because there's so little that we know. But an interesting factor is the idea that this area where the suitcase was found was something that was an area that was very well known to the locals. And perhaps if someone was out of town, they would have thought that that was a discrete location. But if it was a local, it was the intention of putting someone there, they would have known that it would have been easily found. So either it's kind of hard to make a guess about what someone's intentions were, but it's possible that the person was intentional in having her found, and then you kind of have to ask why, and then why is this fisherman so motivated in opening this suitcase?
And to add to the mystery, the fisherman has sort of gone off the grid, so we're still looking for him.
Not officially a suspect or anything like that we know of. But yeah, I think you raised some interesting questions there, Chloe, like wouldn't there be a smell? And especially if you're finding this in the dead summer.
Like, at what point do you stop because you think that there's money in the suitcase, because it looks like it's very concealed?
Yeah.
So there's probably something in there of value or something disturbing. At what point do you stop and you're like, this doesn't smell like money? It smells like a decomposing body. That's a pretty distinct smell, even if you haven't smelled it before. But I would imagine as a fisherman, he's smelled other things that have been dying and decomposing.
That's a good point. I mean, who knows?
You're out there in the elements.
Yeah, maybe the lake smells.
Yeah, I believe he worked for the local hatchery.
Okay.
So he's dealing with fish dying all the time. I'm not comparing a body smelling like dead fish, but you can smell the smell of death.
But I think the question's valid. Why go through the length of opening the entire suitcase? The rib, or is it the wire?
The wire. Picking apart wire and tape. It's like I said, it's very motivated, and who knows? Maybe there's things that we don't know. What if he didn't have a sense of smell?
Right.
Like there are things like you said, at which point do you take a step back and think, okay,
There's no money in here.
There's no money in here, and maybe I should contact the appropriate authorities. When the legs of the body were found 6 months later in a separate location, and the people came across that and they didn't investigate at all. They immediately called the police. So it's just kind of unpacking the different reactions to things is interesting, and also just trying to understand the motivation in the choice of location as well.
Astrid here on Facebook says, Devil's Advocate, why couldn't the smell be motivating in an OMG, a body is in there kind of way?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Right.
I think that's kind of what I was getting at in a roundabout way. Just at what point do you say, this isn't money, this is something else, this is something that's dying? And maybe he did continue because he wanted to do the right thing.
Curiosity, maybe.
Morbid
even.
curiosity,
Yeah.
but in a well-intended way, he destroyed evidence.
Yeah.
So, I guess just not having the sort of wherewithal to know that if it's not money, it smells like death, you should probably stop and call the cops.
I can see that someone thought it was money.
Oh, sure.
Chloe, do you think this perpetrator, the killer of Suitcase Jane Doe, is this someone who has acted before or since?
We talk about the method in which the legs were removed. It's kind of makes you want to throw up. It's really disturbing, but picking apart the soft tissue with a small blade, unless it was a hunter or something like that was experienced in that way, it's hard to imagine that this person hadn't engaged in such violent acts before or since. That's another thing. What has this person done since the Suitcase Jane Doe?
I just want to interject here. We got the Twitter feed going.
Great.
I
Yep.
wasn't sure if we were actually getting comments, but we're now getting comments.
Wonderful.
I think it's a little jumpy. Some people are saying that's a little jumpy, but I think that's just the Twitter thing.
Okay.
So welcome, everybody. Nama, Chris Duet is there from what I see.
So let's get into Brandon Lawson's disappearance and talk about that. And we did an episode about Brandon Lawson's disappearance that was published on November 7th, 2018. So you can check that out if you'd like. We have a bunch of comments on YouTube that we'd like to go over too. But before we do, Chloe had some correspondence with Brandon's brother, Kyle. Do you want to go over that correspondence real quick?
Sure. So Kyle Lawson is an important person in this case because he was corresponding with Brandon throughout that evening. He wasn't aware that Brandon had called the police asking for help himself. I think because Brandon had an active warrant out for his arrest for a nonviolent drug offense, he was assuming that he did not want contact with the police. However, he and his then partner, Audrey, were receiving disjointed and intermittent phone calls from Brandon with comments including, "I'm bleeding, I'm being chased," and a recent article quoted Kyle as saying Brandon at one point said to him, "I'm being chased by Mexicans," to which Kyle responded, "Are you tripping?" So he was out there that night looking for his brother, and I think this disappearance has haunted him to this day. So we figured he would be a really valuable person to interview, especially when he's being quoted by other sources, one of which was a quote we'd only heard from that source. So I got into contact with Kyle. He was very willing to talk to us. We actually have an interview planned for either late February or early March. I think his input will be really important. But yeah, it was great to sort of just exchange some letters with him. One of the things that he said was that Kyle was my best friend and my role model. So it's just it's a heartbreaking situation.
Very heartbreaking.
That his brother Brandon was?
Yes.
Yeah. So over here on YouTube, we got some comments, and you mentioned Mexicans are after me. So one of these comments here on YouTube from John says, if he said, quote, "the Mexicans are after me," end quote, maybe they actually were after him. Why would that have to be a delusion? He adds an LOL.
Yes, and this got 19 upvotes, so it actually I think is our top comment on the video, and someone followed up, "I came here to say the exact same thing. Mexicans are not a figment of the imagination. You can be for real, be chased by another human being." I was a little taken aback why Chloe said that. I'm sure she has her reasons why, and it probably came out wrong, but it doesn't point to him being delusional. We border Mexico. It's not strange. So that was something that we had talked about. You know, we're up here in Massachusetts, and we don't border Mexico, so it might come off as a little bit more strange to us, but the reason why I thought that it came off as a little bit delusional was because his own brother, in response to hearing that, asked him if he was tripping. So it kind of does seem like a statement where you're having delusions of persecution when the person that's hearing it doesn't even think that it's for real.
Although the "are you tripping" comment might not have anything to do with it being drug related. Could just be like, "Bro, you tripping?"
That's an expression. Yeah, I'm not saying he
Either
thought
way,
that he
yeah.
was. Yeah, but his brother was almost incredulous to hear that, thinking it didn't really make any sense.
And Kim here says, it is important to point out the sheriff's wife owns the local newspaper. She has reported stuff about Brandon that is not true or has said things creating innuendos that makes Brandon look bad. The fact that cops didn't respond like they should have, they will not go search like they should have. What do you guys think about that one?
That's true. I've heard that from Jason.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure, I don't think it was this exact article that we're talking about, but there was another article that the sheriff's wife had actually written that had a pretty negative tone towards Brandon. And I'm pretty sure the headline was, "Sheriff Brandon Lawson is no longer in the county." So that raises a red flag right away, because it's like, we don't know where he is. So how do you know he's not in the county? It seems a little bit odd and perhaps a biased source.
And here's someone named Barbs on YouTube says that boars, because we talked about wild boar in Brandon's case, and we put it out there as a possibility that he was maybe attacked by wild boar, and I don't think we definitely never said that this was something that happened to Brandon or that even we believe this happened to him. But I think that it is interesting that there are boar in that area who can attack people. And so some people were commenting on it here. Barbs said, boars are known to live deep in the woods, not a half mile from the road. I've never known anyone to hit a boar on the road like we do deer. And then our friend Jason, who was on the episode with us, replied, believe it or not, there have been instances where boar have been hit by cars. As a matter of fact, when I left Bronte the first time, I saw a dead one on the side of the road. But it's not very common for that to happen. As you said, they don't typically hang out near a roadway. They like to stay in cover. Jason also said that there was a report of a boar hitting a pickup truck. He messaged me about that. So it's not really something he's experienced firsthand, he said, but it is something that happens.
Yeah, again, we're not saying that this is our conclusion.
Right.
We're saying that this is a very real possibility when you're equaling out all of the factors that go into this.
Yeah, and I think it's just talking about the different wildlife or the wildlife that could potentially harm humans. These kind of cases draw interest from all around the country and all around the world. So it's very interesting to sort of dig deeper, because that was something that we didn't fully understand being from New England, the risk of predatory wild boars towards people. So I think it's a really important point of discussion in hearing from the locals in that.
Someone said he's not under the influence. He's stressed, scared, and running. It's that simple. Fight or flight. Shock makes people not make sense too. So any other thoughts on Brandon Lawson's disappearance?
Well, there's a comment there from Kim saying, what about the gunshots that people heard?
Yeah.
In the call, in the 911 call. And if you're listening for gunshots, you're going to hear gunshots. If you're considering the situation that he was in, and his cell phone could have hit his hand, his pants, anything, these probably were not gunshots. They certainly didn't sound like gunshots to us. I think what is obvious is something that Jason had told us when we had him on, which is the only thing you can really hear that is something that is happening is him talking on the phone and looking from side to side, because you hear his voice go in and out in that side to side, not having the phone in front of his face way.
Right. And here's someone, Aristad in Minnesota, says, you need to consider the fact that police are involved. There's no other explanation. I lose respect for investigative podcasts that should, but won't center on that. It is the white elephant in the room.
I agree that we should definitely consider the facts and focus on facts, but I don't know how on earth someone could jump and say that's a fact. I think when you're pointing the finger at police, you better have facts and you better have some sort of proof, and we have none. And Jason actually responded to that comment saying the sheriff himself could not have been involved. He was not in town the night Brandon was missing. So we have nothing to go off of with that. So yeah, how could we say that's a fact?
Yeah, and also the wording here, you need to consider the fact that police are involved. We considered it.
We considered the idea that they were involved.
You have to look at everything, and we considered the fact that boars might have been involved, and we're considering the fact that Mexican drug runners might have been involved based on what Kyle had said.
Right.
So, yeah, we consider all the facts.
Yeah.
But to then say there's no other explanation is a little bit irresponsible on her end.
It's a really common attitude I've noticed amongst the online community in all of the cases that I've sort of chipped in on with this show. A lot of people really like the police conspiracy angle. I see it all the time. And I think when things don't make sense, it's like, oh, well, that explains why things don't make sense. And that explains why things aren't solved. But like I said, there's no factual basis to that at this point.
Okay, so do you want to pivot now to talking about Jayme Kloss and her disappearance and resurfacing, which has been pretty major story in news outlets over the past few weeks. Of course, Jayme Kloss was taken from her home in a home invasion where this guy named Jake Patterson, who was 21, he just saw Jayme getting on a bus and decided, quote, that's the girl he was going to take.
And that's a quote that he told police.
Yes. And so he went back to this house 3 times, and on the third time was somewhere around midnight a few months ago, about 3 months ago, and he went in with a shotgun, shot her dad, and hunted for Jayme and her mom Denise, and ended up finding them in the bathroom, in the tub.
After he broke down the door with 15 to 20 blows against the door with his over 200-pound body. And I can't even imagine the terror that Jayme and her mom had when they were in the bathtub holding on to each other, and they're hearing the door smashing down after they heard a gunshot, knowing that her father and her husband he was probably gone, he was probably murdered. This was something that was so well orchestrated in the beginning, but clearly somebody with severe emotional, mental problems. And although it was premeditated, right down to shaving all of the body hair, like shaving his head and making sure his face was shaven so that he didn't leave any hair follicles on the scene.
Wearing gloves,
wearing one of those masks that is like a ski mask, the balaclava mask, which should be banned. I mean, maybe I'm being too alarmist on this, but there's only 2 reasons why you buy that, and one of them is to conceal your face. Anyway, I can't even wrap my head around the brutality that this random act inflicted on this poor young girl.
It's horrifying to see that the steps this guy took, and then he kept her under his bed in his bedroom for about 87 days until she escaped herself. So, Chloe, how do you feel about the mentality that this guy has, or the psychology behind this guy, Jake Patterson, and being as premeditative as he was? It's scary.
It was very well planned. I don't think he quite had a plan or a very good plan for once he had Jayme, because like we just said, he was keeping her under his bed with hampers and storage things with weights. He witnessed her getting on a school bus just one time, and that was enough for him to decide that was his girl. So we see someone who is incredibly motivated, incredibly obsessive, and just seeing someone one time motivated him enough to completely possess her as a human being and take down anyone that would either witness it or get in his way. I think we see someone with major control issues, someone with poor anger management, and we see his anger management issues based on what Jayme described throughout her ordeal and the way that he tormented her throughout. We still haven't had much detail about what she went through, and I think that is probably out of sensitivity to Jayme and to her healing. I know a lot of people will jump out and say, oh, he's mentally ill, or he's not right in the head. And I think that's correct to do something like that and to require so much control and possession over another person. There's something very wrong with him. But there is nothing that I have seen so far that negates any responsibility from him. This was a premeditated and intentional act, and there is nothing that takes away from his criminal responsibility.
And the Weekend Warrior joined here on Twitter with the first real comment. He even removed the emergency trunk release handle from the trunk. So he knew that he was putting her in the car. He snipped a wire that was going to prevent her from escaping from the trunk. So yet another bit of premeditation.
Terrifying. I mean, this guy's well aware of the steps to have gone through. He got away with it for 3 months.
There was no impairment in his executive functioning or his ability to plan and execute something successfully. So there's no issues there. What we're seeing is issues with his own sense of control and his impulse control, and potentially, we don't know what happened to her, but a fixation on a child is also never good.
Yeah. We say here that if someone, a murderer, were to listen to a podcast, were to consume a lot of this true crime media stuff, they would have a better idea of how to get away with something like this. It makes me wonder if this guy consumed a lot of these things because he was ahead of the curve on a lot of these things. Most killers, we find out, are not consuming things like what we're talking about right now.
Most of them operate a lot on luck.
Yeah.
They're just very aware of how lucky they got.
But this guy, starting with picking someone random,
at least aware of any sort of follow up.
Yeah,
like no connection to her. So that's a pretty good start.
It's a very good start. Most cases go unsolved because there's no connection between perpetrator and victim. That's obviously the first investigative path to take, is trying to find some sort of connection, and there was none. I think he actually, there is an article, and I'm considering the source Radar Online, but if you look, you don't really see that much of a social media presence for Jake Patterson, but there have been recent reports that he actually closely monitored the discussion groups on Facebook. I was actually a part of one, where people would discuss. So this whole time when everyone's discussing leads and what they think might have happened, he's closely looking and he's Googling, Jayme Kloss Barron, Jayme Kloss Gordon, where he lived, just to see. And he also Googled the person that was caught in her home stealing underwear. And obviously we know that he had nothing to do with it. People, I'm noticing there's still some online chatter of potentially Jayme knowing him or being involved in the act. And that's something that people were kind of speculating about early on. The police went through all of her phone activity and his and found no connection. Neither of them owned up to that. So I kind of feel like those conversation points can be put to rest. If there were, they would have found him really quickly.
I want to give a quick shout out to the two people who helped bring Jayme back to law enforcement and back to her family, which is the woman who found her, Janine Nutter, who took her in, and Kristen Kazinskis, which I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But these are the two women who identified that there was a problem before they even knew that this was Jayme. Janine Nutter was walking her dog and saw Jayme and had a quick conversation with her before realizing that she had to get her somewhere safe. And once they found out who she was, they realized that the person she escaped from would probably come looking for her. So they sort of, I don't want to say they like mobilized, but they sort of mobilized in case that happened.
Well, yeah, her husband was
standing by the door with a weapon.
Yeah, with a gun, ready. And for the record, they were right to be that afraid, because Jake Patterson, when he
did go out and look for her.
He went home and realized Jayme was not under his bed. He searched his house, found out that she was not in the house, got back into the Taurus, and drove around looking for her.
And, and also the fact that he had shot her father through the door. So Jayme woke up that night because her little dog was barking, and she woke her parents, and the father goes to the door and investigates, probably half asleep, not entirely sure exactly what's going on. He hears "get on the ground," thinks it might be a police officer, asks for a badge, and he ends up getting shot through a door. So knowing those details, I would be pretty terrified being in that house waiting for a law enforcement response, knowing what this ruthless person is capable of.
Yeah. Nama here has a comment. Yikes! What do you make of that fixation on a child, Chloe? Sorry if I missed it. It's a crazy.
It's a good question, because Jayme was 13 and Jake Patterson was 21, so that's a pretty considerable age difference there. She is a child, basically.
Right. So what was his long-term plan with this?
We don't know. And that's kind of what's scary to think about, is how much longer was this going to go on? How much longer did he intend to keep her alive? And investigators, prosecutors at this point, they're not really speaking to a motive. And I think that's probably out of sensitivity to the victim. But the desire to overcome and control a child, we don't know for sure if he was a pedophile or if the motive was sexual. But this is someone that is so in need of control that rather than, I don't like to say pick on someone your own size, but it's a lot easier to control and handle a child than it is an adult.
From Haley on Facebook, she says, "I'm from that part of Wisconsin, and this was insane. The sort of thing doesn't happen here. The whole community was scared and hopeful that she would be found. My Facebook feed was all about it for a while." And we were talking about it before we started here, and it is kind of a miracle that she's alive and actually was able to escape and really solve this case herself. But, I mean, what are the chances that she was alive? I mean, I don't think any of us thought that was the case.
I mean, the longer it goes on, the more you think, okay, well, this isn't going to end well if she's ever found.
Did Patterson go into some plan about trying to kill her? Or, I mean, as we just talked about,
what was his plan?
Yeah, there was no she wasn't going to exist under his bed for 30 years.
It's not like he dug a bunker for her.
Right. So he was waiting to get caught, or he was going to kill her at some point and do this again.
Or waiting for her to fall in love with him. He could have had some sort of delusion that over time it would have worked out. Someone made the observation, Jake has a brother, Eric, that actually has a sex offense conviction. When he was 18, he went across state lines to meet and have sex with a 15-year-old. And his current girlfriend is like the spitting image of Jayme. So that's just a little odd. But it seems like he really had no long-term plan. And that makes me think maybe he had some sort of delusion that this was going to work out for him and he was going to have himself a little wife or girlfriend.
Guy's got a $5 million bail on him right now.
How does he have bail, but John Juca doesn't have bail?
Hey, great question.
That is a great question.
That drives me nuts.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe certain prosecutors can tell us why.
Yeah. So Patterson is facing 2 charges of intentional homicide along with kidnapping and armed burglary counts, and he did confess to the case, right?
Right away. As soon as he got pulled over, he said, "I did it."
Yeah.
And just went into heavy detail. He even said that his choice of weapon, which was that shotgun, he knew that it was one of the most commonly owned gun in the state. So he knew that it would be even more difficult for them to track it down. He was not stupid.
And when he was leaving the Kloss residence with Jayme in his trunk, he actually pulled over for the vehicles, the emergency vehicles that were on the way to the Kloss household.
While she's in the trunk.
The police got there within 4 minutes of the 911 call, which came from Denise Kloss, Jayme's mother's phone, while the two were hiding, sitting in the bathtub behind the shower curtain. According to Jake, he went in and told Denise to hang up the phone, and 4 minutes later, the police are there. And they're able to surmise from the scene that Jayme was still alive, and they're thinking now he had mentioned that he nearly slipped in James Kloss's blood in the doorway as they're leaving, and he had Jayme tied up, dragging her down the room, so they were actually probably able to see drag marks from Jayme. That's probably how they were able to figure out that she was still out there and that she was not a suspect in the case, because that's another thing they said almost immediately, that they did not consider Jayme Kloss a suspect in the murder of her parents.
Now, what is the plan for Jayme? Well, what as a professional, what is the plan for someone who has seen this happen firsthand, saw her mother get shot in the head with a shotgun at point blank range, was taken and put underneath a 2.5 foot space under a twin bed, and then had to escape on her own? Where does someone like that go?
She has a lot of trauma to work through. I was overjoyed to see that they actually released a lot of pictures of her with her surviving family members, who all seem just so loving and so supportive and just doting on her. So while she has these risk factors, which are the trauma and seeing all and experiencing all these horrible things, she also has quite a bit of protective factors, which is the family to come home to. As a 13-year-old, children are quite resilient and they can kind of bounce back from things. It's going to be a process. She's going to need to talk to someone down the road. She's going to probably need some therapy. But what a therapist would recommend, and I think is what the family's doing, is to sort of let her come to them, not prying out details of what she went through, not needing to know every single thing she went through, but sort of letting her process, giving her some space on her own to process and sort of come to them when she's ready, empower her, because remember, this is 88 days of her having completely no power, being completely helpless. So right now they just need to focus on loving, supporting, and empowering Jayme.
And so the whole incident in the Kloss household, where Patterson started by banging on the door and ended by dragging Jayme out, only lasted about 4 minutes. So just to put that in some perspective, I mean, her whole life changed in the matter of 4 minutes. She was asleep. 4 minutes later, she's being dragged out. Her parents are dead, and she is now living with someone against her will.
And urinated out of fear. And imagine, being in the trunk of that car, hearing the emergency sirens, probably feeling him, because he pulls over the car to get out of their way. Maybe even having a slight feeling of hope that this is it, that she's going to be rescued, only to be in the car for another 2 hours and then be subjected to 88 days of captivity. And you mentioned, there's a level of planning and intelligence, and there's also an element of luck. And the fact that Taurus, that maroon Taurus, didn't become a vehicle of interest, even though it was driving away from the direction of the crime and he wasn't pulled over or searched. That was his element of luck there, where maybe he could have been apprehended, Jayme could have been rescued sooner, but it didn't happen that way. And when law enforcement did release information of potential vehicles of interest, that was not one of them, even though they noted that vehicle in their notes that were later came out.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one to swallow.
Jayme here in the chat room says, don't most killers make mistakes and learn as they go?
I'd say so.
I guess the answer is if you're lucky enough to get away with it, yeah, you'd probably improve.
What not do the next time.
Right.
Mojo Susan on Twitter says, there was a case I saw a doc of called The Girl in the Box about Colleen Stan, who was held captive under a bed like Jayme. I have not heard of this. I've not seen it.
No.
Have you? A Girl in a Box? We'll check that out. Thanks for the. Thanks for that. Oh, hi, Mistress Priss.
Astrid here in the chat room says, we had a case like that in a German town. It was a boy who was taken by mistake since he had long hair. He was kept for 30 days, and sadly, he is still struggling at 40.
Yeah, those things don't just leave you.
Yeah.
Intervention is really important once you're at that point where you're ready. You can actually, there's some incredibly resilient and strong survivors that were subject to really high profile cases that have kind of come out and made statements of support for Jayme, including Elizabeth Smart, J.C. Dugard. In the past, Sean Hornbeck, too, has spoken out in support. I think he came out and made a statement when Amanda Berry, Gina De Jesus, and Michelle Knight were rescued. And it's all very similar theme. It's just let them feel empowered, let them come to terms with it when they're ready, and just give them the help and support that they need. Because like that comment reflects, if the right things aren't done, it can be really hard to move past such trauma.
What's your opinion on the sentence? What should happen to him?
Throw the book at him, throw away the key.
You want to keep him locked up forever? Hypothetical, I know, like...
I guess that's a different question, different sort of, but...
Let's get a little political there.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's not I'm not trying to get political.
I'm not sure that I really believe in putting someone to death. I understand all the it costs more money to keep them alive and all that kind of thing. And what if they break out, they do it again? That is kind of where you'd get me on the argument. If this person is deemed to definitely be a high probability reoffender, like Ted Bundy or this son of a bitch, Patterson, I would have no problem with them getting put to death.
I agree exactly with what you said. One of the first things that I looked up when everything unfolded was, does Wisconsin have the death penalty? And it doesn't. Wisconsin was actually one of the first states in the United States that abolished the death penalty. So that's not even on the table here. But the maximum punishment is what he deserves for his heinous, cruel, and premeditated crimes.
I have a hypothetical scenario. What if we took John Juca out of Rikers, freed up a spot, and tossed this guy in there?
I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, he'd get killed within a week, I would bet.
People who do this to children don't really survive that long in prison.
Yeah, this guy's not going to last.
Where the heck is Jake Patterson right now? Is he I'm sure he's somewhere much more comfortable than Rikers. He was in the Barron County Jail at first, but one of Jayme Kloss's family members worked there. So it wasn't. So I think it was a conflict of interest issue. So now he's elsewhere. He confessed.
Has he been sentenced?
No.
Okay.
I know that he's pleaded not guilty.
Oh, he did.
Despite the confession. So unless he changes that plea, and I think in most cases like this, it makes sense to first plead not guilty so your lawyers can review the case and see what they can do for you rather than immediately go with pleading guilty and working on negotiating a punishment. But with his extremely detailed confession that was almost smug, like I saw it as an opportunity for him to brag about how much thought and effort he had put into this and how he basically could have gotten away with it if Jayme wasn't such a, and this isn't his words, it's my words, such an amazing, strong, and brave person.
Right. Yeah, he was trying to control every single element, including his confession.
Right.
Yeah, it says here in this great article from CNN about it, it says, in the basement fireplace, he burned her clothes and duct tape and his gloves that he used during the murders. He put Jayme in his sister's pajamas, and she lived essentially under his twin-sized bed. He shut her in with bags, laundry bins, and barbells when visitors arrived or when he left the house.
That's an interesting statement, and it might be a good segue into Mistress Priss's comment on Twitter. She says, I'm curious about the psychopathy that led to this. Gary Ridgway, for example, was molded by his crazy-ass mother. So what do you make of that, Chloe?
We don't really know that much about his parents. There have been a few articles where his mom's terrified to leave the house, and the father was weeping at his son's court date and wrote a note to the Kloss family and was quoted as saying, I don't care about anything except for Jayme's family. And Jayme's family said, well, we haven't received a note and I don't really think we're interested in hearing from him. We don't know what Jake Patterson's childhood was like and what could have happened to him that led him to be this obsessive, controlling piece of garbage. But the fact, something I can't really let go of, is that his brother is a convicted statutory rapist. So they grew up in the same household. They have the same, or 50% of the same DNA. So you have to wonder if something happened in their house that gave them some sort of skewed perception on what's appropriate in a relationship and what's appropriate to expect in love and in sex and things like that. But it's hard to speculate when I know nothing about his upbringing and nothing about his parents.
So it said when his father came on Saturdays, Jake would turn up the bedroom radio to muffle Jayme's movements from under the bed. And he said he kept her in line by yelling and hitting the walls, especially the 2 times he noticed that she had tried to get out from under the bed. And he repeatedly warned her that bad things would happen to her if she tried to come out. And Jayme said that Patterson struck her really hard on the back during one outburst. Sometimes she stayed under the bed for as long as 12 hours with no food, water, or access to a bathroom.
When I think about, his father owned the cabin, and I think maybe a week or so after Jayme was abducted, he transferred the ownership of the cabin to someplace else. I don't know if it was a bank or something. And so whenever the dad's home, that's crazy to think that people are visiting the home while she's there. Whose house is this? I feel like if I were a parent and I'm visiting my home and every time I'm there's blasting music in an unoccupied room, you'd think you would go in there and investigate. You think about all the opportunities that people had to rescue this girl, and it's just baffling to try to grapple why it didn't happen.
So then Patterson applied for a job as a nighttime warehouse worker at a liquor distributor and went to this interview, I take it. And apparently under the skills section, he wrote, quote, I'm an honest and hardworking guy, not much work experience, but I show up to work and I'm a quick learner, end quote.
That's not true. He worked for one day at Jenny O's Turkey Company, which is where Jayme's parents worked. They have no reason to believe that their paths crossed during that time. And he found himself in Barron, Wisconsin, because he worked at a cheese factory in town and I think was either driving to or from his employment when he was behind the school bus, which Jayme occupied. So that lasted for 2 days. So this guy, that's a kind of a risk factor in anyone when they're seemingly incapable of holding a job. Not much work experience, but I show up for work. Right. No, you don't.
So I got an idea. Our buddy Chris Duet could possibly write this guy a letter in prison and we could get a correspondence going. So
that would be awesome.
Wouldn't that be something else?
He has quite a way.
He does have a way to make murderers communicate with him.
Yeah, check out Chris Duet in an episode called Writing with Killers that we did a while back. It is on the feed, on the podcast feed. So Jayme then decided she was not going to be there anymore. So this guy, Patterson, said he was going out for a couple hours, and Jayme pushed everything aside and ran out the door into a snowy landscape wearing only pajamas and her captor's sneakers on the wrong feet. And that's when she ran into Jean Nutter, who was walking her dog, and spotted Jayme Kloss without a coat or gloves, and she ran up to her. And that's the story as we know it now.
That's where it stands now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nutter was a former child protective worker. She was a professional social worker for many years before she retired. So I was saying this before to Lance, short of a police officer, I think it's she couldn't have run into a better person to help her and get her away from that situation.
So Nama says, Chloe, girl, you know your stuff.
Oh, thanks, Nama.
Okay, so any other comments on Twitter? We are wrapping things up here on this Facebook Live vault. Thanks, everyone, for joining in, and we love the comments, and we're going to try to do this regularly, and we're going to try to do it in February on President's Day, since this is a holiday, of course, Martin Luther King Day, that Chloe has off from her normal job, so that's why she is here in person today.
Yep, just a couple more people joined on Twitter, Truck Stop Twank and Melody 2015, so thanks for checking in on Twitter. Next time, hopefully the Twitter thing will be better. Even the way you read their comments, Twitter, get your shit together here. You have to scroll and then it disappears when you take your finger off of it. It's insane.
Still working out the bugs here in the live show, but this audio will make the podcast feed on Wednesday. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and we really appreciate the correspondence as well.
And, check out suitcasejanedoe.com and Jennifer and Mel's work into that case.
Okay, thanks, everybody, for listening.